Thank you very much, Paul. Pleasure to be with you again, virtually, sadly, but nonetheless, good to see you and in good health. Pleasure to get to know Andorra, Mr. Landry, and Secretary of State. Fantastic to get to understand a little bit the unique challenges that Andorra also faces in perfecting, should we say, its relationship with the European Union. I've been asked to talk for 40-45 minutes, so I hope you're patient and relaxed and sitting, as it's probably late in the evening, with more than a coffee by you, so that we can have a proper conversation as I speak here and share my thoughts with you on UK-EU relations after Brexit. Let me just remind you that the UK has only been dealing with the hard graft, the hard work of making the new trade and cooperation agreement with the EU work in practice. It's only been doing this for 8 or 9 months since the beginning of this year. So the UK is in a unique position of being a first country to have left the EU, to try to disconnect all of the sinews and linkages which had built up over 45 years or so since it joined the EU. And it is a remarkably complex, difficult, and painful process. No more painful part of the process than dealing with the trading relationship between Britain and Northern Ireland, which I will talk about in a minute. And when you throw in the disputes over the COVID-19 exports, the UK being one of the first countries to approve those vaccines, disputes over fisheries, which are ongoing today, clearly the risk, Paul and everyone, is that the UK-EU relationship will actually deteriorate before it can settle into a healthy new modus vivendi, a new way of living together. So what I wanted to do was talk first, say a few words about what the status is right now of the UK-EU relationship. How has it evolved? What is the nature of this trade and cooperation agreement, which I will call the TCA, to bring the acronym into this conversation. Second, I'll consider how the UK-EU relationship might evolve over the coming months and into the next year as we get through this painful first year. I also want to then third discuss a bit about how the foreign policy of Britain in the EU might evolve, and will it be a source of alignment between the UK and the EU on things like Russia, China, climate change? Might foreign policy stabilize the relationship? Might it help, or will it be part of the problem? And in that, I'll also consider the relationship with the Biden administration. Is that going to be a positive discipline on the UK-EU relationship, or the opposite? And I'll offer then, Paul, some concluding thoughts on the relationship at the end. So let me start at the beginning. What's the status of the UK-EU relationship today? I have one word: bad. I wish I could say something better than that, but I think that captures it. Why? Well, after coming to power in July 2019, I'm happy to answer questions on all the complex British politics if you want later on, but let's get to the question. Why is it bad? Boris Johnson, when he became Prime Minister after replacing Theresa May, he moved very quickly to sign a basic free trade agreement with the EU. In fact, they did it in a year. after completing the withdrawal agreement, because it is very thin agreement on goods, but it has no mutual recognition and no inclusion of preferential treatment for trade in services. So gone were the plans of the Theresa May government for the UK to retain privileged access to the EU's single market, which would have required what they call a dynamic alignment between future UK regulations and those of the EU. In other words, the UK would have had to keep itself in lockstep with EU regulations as they evolved, a bit like Norway does. And that was something that Boris Johnson felt would undermine British sovereignty. Also gone is the idea of the UK remaining inside somehow the EU customs union, something that some British politicians recommended. But the fact is, there was no way that a British government could accept handing to the EU control over its trade policy. Because if you're in the customs union, but outside the EU, you have to then accept whatever deals the EU negotiates, the terms they negotiate, the preferential sectors that benefit from that agreement, paying no attention to the benefits of the United Kingdom. And for the UK, the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world today, still, and a country that likes to think of itself as a free trading nation, this would be impossible. The net result is perverse. It's perversely bad for Britain. Let me remind you, the UK has long run a trade deficit in goods, in manufactured products with the EU. The TCA now entrenches that structural advantage for the EU in goods trade, because it's zero tariff, zero quota on goods. However, the TCA puts up new obstacles to the UK's services exports to the EU, despite the fact the EU ran a surplus in services trade with the EU. The best example for this, of course, is financial services, the UK's biggest service export to the EU. UK banks no longer benefit from passporting rights into the EU. We're going to have to rely on the Commission granting what they call equivalence. The EU Commission will decide whether UK regulation is good enough to be equivalent to the EU in specific sectors. And the Commission can grant it and take away equivalence with a matter of months. So it leaves UK financial services in a very risky position. But for Boris Johnson, that wasn't the priority. We can talk more about his priorities later. But something I think he didn't think about was all those other services that Britain is so good at exporting. Film production, music groups, garden designers, all those small businesses and small people, groups that would travel around Europe, interacting, making money. Now they face massive obstacles on being able to move around the EU. In addition, because the UK was not ready for Brexit, we didn't expect, not even Boris Johnson expected Brexit to win. We didn't have the customs systems, the staff, the number of customs forms has grown from 50,000 to 250,000. a year, literally in the blink of an eye. And the UK is simply not ready for this massive increase in customs forms and the burden it's putting on Brexit controls. So currently, while the EU is imposing new border restrictions on British products, on checking the regulations, the phytosanitary health of our meat products, the UK is voluntarily not doing any checking of EU products going into the UK. So crazy, but that's the reality. Now, this brings us to Northern Ireland, and I have to sadly say something about this, obviously, because it is a big topic. Northern Ireland was granted a unique status under the withdrawal agreement that the UK signed with the EU at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And Johnson agreed that Northern Ireland could stay inside the single market and inside the customs union, although it would be a sovereign part of the United Kingdom. Again, you might think that's kind of a crazy proposal, but it meant that you would not need to have any border checks between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, which meant that in a way the rest of the UK could go ahead and do the free trade agreement that Boris Johnson always wanted to do, the very thin, sovereign-controlled, least restrictive agreement. But he created a border, in essence, down the Irish Sea. So he has created a border down the Irish Sea, something that Theresa May was never going to accept, in order to try to protect the Good Friday Accords, that have prevented violence between Protestants and Catholics and Unionists and Nationalists in the island of Ireland. But that border has imposed all sorts of new restrictions on UK exports to Northern Ireland. And that's made the politics of Northern Ireland very sensitive. When you can't export British sausages and other chilled meats from the United Kingdom to Northern Ireland, that's practically a declaration of war for many people in Northern Ireland. And I'm being a little bit jokey about it, but it is serious. And in a way, what's happened is that the unionist community now worries that the TCA is going to drive new demands for unification between the North and the South, that it might drive the breakup of the United Kingdom. Boris Johnson, of course, does not want that to happen. His party is called the Conservative and Unionist Party. That's its formal name. But he's now trying to, well, we'll come to it in a minute. He's trying to undo the deal he did. The third problematic area for the TCA is migration. Immigration from the EU to the UK has fallen dramatically, especially in the last year and a half since Brexit really came into force. Just as an example, in 2016, the year of the EU referendum, 220 to 230,000 of the 330,000 net immigrants into the UK came from the EU. In 2020, those figures had completely reversed. There's only about 60 or 70,000 net immigrants from the EU into the UK. Ironically, we're now bringing more immigrants in from other parts of the world, so we haven't stopped immigration. But what it's meant is that we don't now have those workers from places like Romania and Bulgaria who were willing to work for low pay in critical areas of the UK economy, like food processing and agriculture. There's the ironic discussion in the British papers right now that Britain is going to need to import 1 million extra turkeys into the United Kingdom in order for us to celebrate Christmas, as British people like to celebrate them, with their turkey. because we don't have enough people willing to work in the abattoirs processing turkeys in the United Kingdom. And more immediately, Britain, I don't know if you've seen this on the news, has been suffering from petrol shortages in our petrol stations. And we've had huge queues of cars trying to get petrol, not because we lack petrol, but we lack lorry drivers to drive the petrol to the petrol stations. And this is with the rising prices and the winter coming on, more people driving to work has caused a real crisis that's only now starting to be lifted. And lastly, there's a few other frictions that you need to be aware of. The French government, the French always end up causing problems for the Brits, and we cause problems for them. That's part of our natural state. We're returning to it now. The French government is trying to create new obstacles for British universities to be able to participate in the big R&D EU program called Horizon, in which Britain has always been one of the most successful players. And the UK agreed, and the EU agreed, that the UK would remain inside Horizon as part of the TCA. And the UK will pay the full, normal fee to do that. But for some reason, interestingly, as the consortiums are being developed to carry out this research, the French are creating technical obstacles to the British universities. So all the best contracts are now going to other universities, and the British will have to catch up later on. I'm just saying, those frictions are there. Pretty much the only bit of good news, in my opinion, is in the area of data sharing, where the EU has in essence agreed that UK laws are strong enough to protect the data of EU citizens, and therefore EU and UK companies are able to share their data across the borders when they undertake trade and services and so on, which, as you all know, I know many of you are business people here, is incredibly important to be able to carry out effective business in today's world. And given that, for example, German car companies are some of the biggest investors in the UK, it would have been a real problem not only to have these new checks on the borders which are taking place, but not to be able to share data. Now, point two, how is the relationship going to evolve over the next year or two? Where are we headed? I have a simple answer. In the near term, it's going to get worse. Sorry, but that's my opinion. Why? A, the obstacles to UK-EU trade are going to get worse in the couple of months. I think that some of you deal in business and trading. You will hopefully know what I mean when I say rules of origin. If you have a zero tariff agreement with any country, you still have to agree the rules of origin that come under that zero tariff agreement. Otherwise, the UK could become a satellite for importing components from other parts of the world, put them into a UK product, and then sell it into the EU at zero tariff. So, we have a quite strict rule that I think it's right, 55% of any UK export to the EU has to have either UK or EU components inside it. That needs to be checked. And the EU is going to start demanding paper, formal, detailed checks before products are exported into the EU. That is not happening right now. And it'll cause real problems for those smaller British companies that don't have the people or the technical wherewithal to live up to this. There's many of the smaller companies that are falling out of UK-EU business. The big ones will resolve it. Also, the UK is going to start imposing its own checks, rules of origin, regulations, standards on EU imports into the UK, starting between January and July 2022. At this point, of course, the Irish problem might come to a boil, unless UK and EU negotiators can find some type of compromise. As we heard in the Conservative Party conference that is taking place right now, Boris Johnson and the EU negotiator for the UK, Lord Frost, have said, we will use Article 16 of the TCA, which allows us to just pull out unilaterally if we think the TCA is causing some deep damage to the fabric of British society. It's one of those nuclear safeguard options that exists in the TCA. But of course, if the British do that, and the EU feel it's been done unfairly, and they believe the reason all of these checks have to happen is because the UK have not prepared their borders well enough to deal with this issue, then the EU will be able to impose retaliatory tariffs or other sanctions on British trade in other sectors. Yeah. So if the UK does something wrong on Britain-Irish trade, the EU could retaliate on financial services or on car exports. That capacity for cross-sectoral retaliation is written into the TCA. There is a solution out there, which was people always thought was going to be used for this problem at the outset, which is not to have checks on products that will not be re-exported from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland. But for some reason, this hasn't been possible till this day. And the real problem here, right, I must underline this, is the deep lack of trust between the two sides. The EU does not trust Boris Johnson, and they have good reason, I'm afraid to say. Boris Johnson wanted to rip up the internal market bill that would have, in essence, ensured that Northern Ireland would have been kept inside state aid rules that exist now between the UK and the EU. So there's this sense that Boris Johnson is somebody who signs deals and then breaks deals straight after. You can't trust his word. And that makes it very difficult for the EU to compromise. I'd say fisheries is another flashpoint. Why? The UK is now starting to give out licenses, and they are creating some very localized problems for specific fishermen. And the specific fishermen in question are mostly French. And of course, France has a presidential election coming up in spring 2022. And, you know, I think the last war, I can't remember if it was after or before the Falklands War, the Malvinas War, was the cod war, the cod fish that we had with Iceland. You know, so fisheries often becomes quite violent, as we know, around the world. And with the French presidential elections coming up in spring 22, this could become a problem. You know, we'll have to keep an eye on financial services. As I said, that's an area where if the EU does not grant the UK equivalence, the UK will see that as a sort of declaration of war on the City of London. And you can bet the Bank of England and British politicians will do more deregulatory moves and try to compete more aggressively with the EU. That's a risk. And we could see some new divergence in the area of data governance. As I said, that's an area that is good right now. But British citizens have a more relaxed approach to how you regulate data, their personal data, than, let's say, German citizens, who tend to be the most protective about their data. And this is partly to do with the long-standing terrorist threats that the UK has experienced. We're willing to share our personal data with government if it keeps us safe, and we believe our law courts and our judiciary will protect us. But underneath the surface, I think the British government sees two areas where it will be able to compete with the EU and do better than the EU after Brexit than before. And they are financial services and technology investment, data investment. And it believes, the British government believes, that being outside the EU, Britain is going to be able to become a 21st century economy in a way that the EU, stuck with slow-making regulation in technology, is not able to be. And some of the figures of foreign direct investment into the British tech sector appear to bear this out. The UK recorded its highest ever 6 months of foreign direct investment into tech startups in the first 6 months of 2021, since Brexit came fully into force. 18 billion pounds worth. That is larger than the amount of funds that went into France, Germany, and Israel combined in that period. And by the way, it's 3 times higher than the period in 2020. So, the British government may actually have found an area of competitive success. And in the end, I suppose the last thing I want to say why I'm not confident about relations improving, all guests, is that British politics are still British politics. And Boris Johnson has an election coming up at the latest in July 2024, 5 years after the last election. But many people think he'll go to the polls definitely in 2023, maybe even late 2022, partly because the Labour Party is still very weak and he wants to get them while they're weak, partly because some of the negative things I've described about the British economy might start filtering through. Politicians are always lucky for the first 1 or 2 years. In the third year, politicians start to become unlucky. For the purpose of the next election, I am confident that Johnson will fire up his base of Brexit supporters again. And he will want to say, I delivered Brexit, and things are tough, but that's because the EU is being nasty and they're giving us a hard time on Northern Ireland and fish and whatever. He has little to gain politically from improving UK-EU relations right now. Nothing, in fact, to gain from that. So, right, my third point, I'm on time. Can foreign policy bridge the divide that I've described here? I'm going to keep being negative. My simple answer in the near term is no. Well, why? Again, first of all, the Johnson government deliberately decided not to negotiate a specific treaty or agreement with the EU alongside the TCA on security and foreign policy that would lay out the kind of structures for UK-EU cooperation. This was an idea that Theresa May had put on the table, and the EU was very happy to strike such a treaty. But in essence, that greater predictability and transparency that such an agreement would have provided to the two sides is not something the Johnson government wanted to give. Why? I think partly the Johnson government believes Brexit needs to be complete and real for it to sort of transform Britain into the global Britain that he has in mind, which is kind of Britain alone, Britain, the solo country, striking out over the waves. It's very much the image of Britain from the Elizabethan era, from Britain alone in the Second World War. This resonates for many people in the United Kingdom, certainly for his voters. And therefore, he wanted to keep as much flexibility as possible in his foreign and security policy. And he wanted also to avoid the appearance and the reality of the UK kind of being an observer of EU foreign policy being made, with them as a kind of lesser partner, invited into the room for the particular decisions. That's not the image of the global Britain he wants to present. So in a way, he wants to hold out, I think, for a more structured relationship later in the future, when the broader relationship has settled down and EU members won't use such a treaty to try to sort of hold Britain down, and Britain has got a bit more space to be more accommodating to the EU. In the meantime, what is Britain doing? It's focusing on building up its bilateral relationships with EU member states. It's building up its diplomatic presence in a number of EU capitals. It's even brought some people back from other parts of the world where David Cameron had sent them to try to deepen those bilateral relations. There is already a very important bilateral security relationship with the French, the Lancaster House Defence Agreement. The UK is trying to develop bilateral coordination structures, especially on foreign security policy with Germany and Poland. And I will just add one thing from last night. If you look at Liz Truss, the new Foreign Secretary's first speech as Foreign Secretary, she did this fascinating speech about the network of liberty. That's fine. That's, conference party language. But then she then listed all of the groups of countries she would forge closer ties with our friends and allies, including the G7 and NATO, our Pacific partners, Australia, Japan, and Mexico, our Commonwealth democracies, India, Israel, South Korea, the Gulf states, the Visegrad Four and the Baltic Three, who fought the Soviet Union for their freedom, and of course the USA. Are we missing something here? The words EU never passed her lips, which, by the way, for those of you who, I'll come to in a minute, look at the integrated review that was done, the word EU never appeared except for when it said, having left the EU, ... and then the sentence continued. So what the UK is looking to do is to sort of keep those intergovernmental relationships alive, like the E3 grouping, UK, France, and Germany, which is principally focused on Iran. And I'm sure the UK wouldn't mind if France and Germany said, oh, we want to involve Italy and have an E3+1, or Britain would say, that's fine, because in a way, it's that intergovernmental space where it has voice, it has weight. It's happy to do that. It's also looking very much at northern countries, Nordic countries, some of which, of course, are inside the EU, some are outside. Some are inside NATO, some are outside. So it has that more flexible combination. There's this northern group of countries the UK is developing. It matches its joint expeditionary force in NATO. And again, that is where the UK is putting its emphasis with Europe, is with NATO. Because NATO is a club that Britain belongs to. It's a club that has the US involved, and it tells the US in a way, we're here with you protecting Europe. And it helps emphasize its relationship in Estonia, where it has an enhanced forward presence. Britain's one of the big spenders. It's the second largest politically, military strong country in NATO. So again, it gives Britain that, that leadership role that I think Boris Johnson is looking for. And as I said, if you read the integrated review on security, defense, and diplomacy, which came out in March 2021, the Johnson government actually said, we will be Europe's main security ally. Russia is the main threat to British security. It says it clearly. But the answer for Britain currently, for this government, is not the EU. The answer to fix it is NATO and other more flexible forms of cooperation. Of course, the other big feature of the integrated review is the tilt in British foreign policy and defense policy towards the Indo-Pacific. Now, this reflects, like for other EU countries and the EU as a whole, how much more important this region is to Britain and British economy and to the global economy. And the fact the UK has quite a few strong bilateral relationships historically, Singapore, Australia, India, more recently with Japan, with South Korea. So Britain has had a long-term presence there. It has the Five Powers defense arrangement, which includes Malaysia and Singapore. It has the Five Eyes intelligence relationship, which includes Australia and New Zealand, as well as Canada and the US. Now, this Indo-Pacific tilt could have been a point of convergence between the UK and the EU, because the EU has developed its own Indo-Pacific strategy, as has France, which has big sovereign territories in that region, as has Germany, as has the Netherlands. But the new AUKUS deal, Australia, UK, US deal that was presented just 2 weeks ago, much to France's surprise, I'm sure you've heard about this big deal, has really, in a way, knocked off the agenda any possibility that the UK and the EU will be able to coordinate right now on Indo-Pacific strategy in any formal way, because obviously France is hugely upset by this deal secretly negotiated behind its back, which has undercut its own submarine deal with Australia. And it is trying to use this opportunity to encourage other EU member states to develop greater European, and the French always mean EU, strategic autonomy, a more autonomous security and defense policy that does not rely on the Americans. And now that the UK is inside AUKUS, it's a bit like, Britain's gone over to the dark side with America. And those Anglo-Saxon nations cannot be trusted. And there are some people beyond France who share that view. There are others who don't. But whatever happens, we're in a much more rocky relationship. It's also AUKUS, this deal, is a timely reminder that the UK's main strategic ally remains the US, not the EU. If the UK wants to build up a long-term strategic partnership with the EU, it's going to need to think about its relationship with a bigger group of democracies. And that's kind of, if we look to the future, if I want to try to think in a more positive way, the most positive way for the UK to engage the EU is actually going to be through the G7. It's to go through an indirect route, not the direct route. As you've heard me say, the UK Johnson government just does not want to engage with the EU right now in a sort of bilateral way. But the G7, which France, Germany, Italy, and the EU are formal members of, provide an opportunity for the UK to kind of coordinate on important issues like the rise of China, WTO reform, combating state surveillance technologies, or global infrastructure that's more sustainable. Those big areas where the UK and the EU agree and should be able to work with bilaterally. It's more likely, I think, that you'll see the UK engage with the EU through an indirect mechanism like the G7 that lets it bring Australia, South Korea, Japan to the table as well, very much like the British did at the G7 summit Boris Johnson hosted in Cornwall this year. So let me conclude. I've described the TCA. It is a very thin agreement deliberately. I've described why that thin relationship, which is causing a lot of problems, is not going to get better in the next year, maybe 2, maybe even 3. And foreign policy is not going to help. So I've got a pretty gloomy prognosis for UK-EU relations in the near term. But my prognosis for the medium term is more positive. And I like to finish on the positive, Bob, so I will finish on the positive. Why? First, the UK and the EU cannot escape each other. I was talking to somebody yesterday and this image came to my mind, and I will say it to you again today. The EU is like the Earth to the UK's moon. The UK cannot escape the gravitational force of the EU, politically, economically, and the UK, however, can move the tide inside the EU. Can drive people crazy as well. So maybe this metaphor is a very good metaphor. So it means the two sides eventually are going to have to compromise with each other. And I think, to be frank, either this government, but if not this government, the next government after Boris Johnson will accept compromises with the EU. And the language will be better, the trust will get better. And when the trust is better, the UK, which is brilliant, the EU, which is brilliant at finding compromises with others, will find ways to resolve the Northern Irish problem or the trading relationships and so on. That's one side of it. Also, I think, second, the UK, Brexit Britain, will start to feel more self-confident. Right now, although Boris talks about global Britain, we're working from a position of weakness, let's be frank, which makes it difficult for the UK government to compromise. But in 5, 6 years' time, 4 years' time, I think it'll be better. The UK by then might have joined the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this trade deal that Japan has completed in the Pacific. It'll have completed other bilateral trade deals with Australia. It's already, okay, some of the new countries, maybe with India, maybe they'll have a sectoral deal with the US. I don't think they'll have a free trade agreement with the US, but maybe they'll have a deal on data. So I think Britain will feel more confident. And thirdly, British politicians now have no excuse for not being better at their jobs at delivering economic and social well-being in Britain. We always used to blame Brussels. We, British politicians, always blame Brussels for everything. Now, as we've seen, the Johnson government is trying to level up and improve the condition for all Britons. They're undertaking the difficult structural, infrastructural, social services, educational, break down the divide between North and South. They're trying to do all those difficult things that, by the way, they did not need to leave the EU to do. But having left the EU, they're actually starting to do them. And I think a less divided Britain internally, politically and economically, will be one that can negotiate a lot better in the future with the EU. My one wild card, before I get too optimistic, Paul, is Scotland. I'm sure if I didn't say the word Scotland, I get a question about Scotland. There is a risk that there will be a referendum on Scottish independence. I don't think it's going to happen soon. I think it's unlikely to happen before the next election in the UK. But look, if it happened, there's a possibility the UK might split. And then the EU would have to negotiate not with Britain, but with England. And England has a lot more conflictual historical relationship with Europe than Britain. I'll stop there.